Today, we are diving into the critical events unfolding across Iran. A massive wave of protests, honestly the most intense we've seen since 2022, is sweeping the country. So we're going to get into what's really driving it, how the government is responding, and what it all means.
Okay, let's just start with a single staggering number: 1,450,000. That is the record low number of Iranian rials it now takes to buy just $1. For millions of people, this wasn't just some number on a screen. It was the exact moment their savings, their salaries, their entire economic reality just evaporated. This was the spark.
And that spark ignited something fierce. This quote, heard on the streets of Tehran, it just shows you that for so many protesters, this isn't about the economy anymore. It's become something way, way bigger, something existential.
To really understand how we got here, we have to start with that economic collapse. I mean, the currency's freefall triggered an immediate and just catastrophic spike in the price of everything. We're talking food, medicine, you name it, pushing ordinary people right to the absolute brink.
So the first people to act were the shopkeepers of Tehran's Grand Bazaar, the Bazaris. And you really can't overstate how important this is. Historically, this merchant class was a key pillar of the 1979 revolution that brought the current regime to power. So for them to shut their doors, that's not just a strike, it is a massive political signal that this crisis has fractured the system's traditional support base.
Now, what began as a merchant strike in the heart of the capital, well, it did not stay contained for long. Let's take a look at how this fire spread across the entire country with really just incredible speed.
Take a look at this timeline. It just maps the explosion. On day 1, you can see it's the bazaars in Tehran. But by day 2, the movement has already gone national, igniting protests in major cities like Isfahan and Shiraz. Then, by day 3, a crucial new element joins the fight: students from Iran's top universities. And they bring this fresh, really confrontational energy to the streets.
And as the protests grew with all these new faces, the message from the streets began to change dramatically. The focus shifted from people's wallets to the very, very top of the political pyramid.
This is so fascinating because you can actually track the sound of raw anger evolving in real time. It starts with specific economic pain, high prices, corruption, but the tone sharpens almost immediately to outright political rejection. Death to the dictator, aimed right at the supreme leader. Then it escalates even further into this radical anti-clerical fury. You even hear a revival of some monarchist slogans, but, and this is so important, also chants like "No to Shah, no to mullahs," which shows you this is a fractured opposition, really only united in its total rejection of the current system.
So how is the government responding to all this? Well, publicly, the message from the new president, Masoud Pezeshkian, is one of conciliation. He's urging his own officials to listen, trying to frame the whole thing as a reaction to economic problems. The official line is, "We hear you."
But the actions on the ground are telling a starkly different story. The state's real answer is coming through heavy security deployments, tear gas in the capital, and these deeply concerning reports of live ammunition being used on crowds. And alongside the mass arrests, state media is pushing that familiar narrative that this is all just a foreign plot. The gap between the government's words and its iron fist, well, it could not be wider.
So this whole complex picture, with its economic trigger, its rapid political escalation, and the state's completely contradictory response, it raises some pretty fundamental questions. So with all this in mind, let's unpack the 4 key debates that really get to the heart of what is happening here.
First up, the big one. Is this whole thing just about the price of bread, or is it something much, much deeper?
Well, the argument that it's purely economic, it points right to the trigger, that currency crash, and the initial slogans. The state itself is pushing this narrative. But the argument against it is powerful. The chants are directly targeting the supreme leader and the entire system of the Islamic Republic, not just some finance minister.
So the crucial point is this: the economic collapse was the match, but it was thrown onto a powder keg of political anger that's been simmering for years. The two have now completely fused together.
All right, next question. Is this crisis homegrown, or is it really the result of international pressure, specifically those U.S. sanctions?
The case for sanctions being the main cause is pretty strong. They have crippled Iran's oil-based economy and cut it off from global finance. But the case against that points to decades of internal corruption and misallocation of resources. And maybe the most telling piece of evidence, the protesters themselves are out on the streets chanting against their own leaders, not against Washington.
So the most accurate assessment is that it's really not one or the other. Sanctions act as a powerful accelerant, right? They dramatically worsen the pain, but they're being poured onto a raging fire of domestic corruption and systemic policy failure.
And that brings us to the ultimate question everyone is asking. Could this be the beginning of the end for the Islamic Republic?
Look, the signs of a serious challenge are undeniable. The protests are nationwide, they cross class lines, and they openly call for the supreme leader's downfall. But the evidence for the regime's resilience is also pretty formidable. Its security forces are loyal, and they have repeatedly shown they're willing to use extreme violence. And the internal opposition, like we saw in the chants, is still fragmented.
So our balanced assessment is that this wave of protest is causing a severe erosion of the regime's legitimacy, no question. However, its immense and proven capacity for violent repression means that an imminent collapse is unlikely. The system is definitely wounded, but it is not broken. Not yet.
Finally, let's address the complex and pretty controversial issue of outside influence. Is the regime right? Is this whole thing being driven by foreign powers? There's no doubt that Iran's foreign rivals, like the US and Israel, are voicing support for the protesters. It serves their geopolitical goals, and it definitely feeds the regime's narrative. But the evidence for the movement's authenticity is just overwhelming. This anger is rooted in years of local, well-documented economic mismanagement and political repression.
But what's so crucial to understand here is that while external actors will always try to leverage these situations, dismissing this movement as foreign-made completely ignores the deep, genuine, and widespread anger that originates inside Iran.
The Islamic Republic has survived massive waves of protests before, in 2009, 2019, and most recently in 2022. It has a brutal but effective playbook for cracking down. But with the economy in an absolute freefall, the traditionally loyal merchant class now on the streets, and slogans that leave zero room for compromise, we're left with this final, critical question. Is this time different?